most of the time we were playing, I was like, I don't really even know what the hell I'm doing with this. Alex, we have a Discord discussions for the first time in a while.
Yes, because there's been discussion in the Discord.
There has been a suggested segment from Datum, actually, and I'll read what he said. What's your favorite character creation experience in A, tabletop role-playing, and B, video games? What's your least favorite for both? Why? All of the above. That's like 5 questions.
It's at least 2 questions.
It's at least 2. So I think what Datum's kind of getting at is that at the beginning of any kind of an RPG experience, you're going to have to build your character out. When you do that, there are ones that are better at creating that experience than others.
There are.
Yeah. I think let's start with some of the basics, though. Do you prefer having a system where they leave you as sort of a blank slate and then introduce a bunch of stuff, or do you want to really build out how you're going to develop your character at the beginning?
I feel like that depends on the type of game I'm playing.
Okay, fair.
Tabletop role-playing game, I like to build a character up front.
Yeah.
Video games, that one really depends, but depending on the game, I like both, honestly. Like, I enjoy the Skyrim kind of thing, where it's like, here's a bit of a tutorial, here's some different things and weapons to use, yes, now level and kind of create your character as you go. That's fine, I enjoy that.
Right.
Or like Fallout, where it's pick your special stats, and then it's like, alright, well, I guess I'm playing this way since I did that.
Sure.
But I also like building out, like, picking a class and then building your character, like, with that, too.
Sure. I appreciate systems that will basically leave you as a blank slate and then kind of let you develop your character as you are going through a system. It's not something you can do with every game.
No.
You can't do it. But, like, recently I was playing some different Diablo-style games, and, apart from Diablo where you actually pick a character class, there are ones, Grim Dawn and Titan Quest both do this, where they they don't give you a class at the beginning. They don't give you anything really at the beginning. You have basic stats, and then you go in, and then after like level 2 or 3, they start introducing that you can have specialties or expertise classes and something like that, and then you can kind of determine what you want to do past that and what you want to put your stats into. Diablo will actually require you to choose one of several different classes. And maybe there is a class system. Knights of the Old Republic did that too, and then they went from having the one class that you pick at the beginning where you're either a scoundrel or a soldier or a scout, and then they have you do like Jedi classes after you get to that point in the story too, later in the game. So there are those sort of things. And you're right, it does depend on the gaming experience that you're looking for. I would say more than just the aspects of designing your character, because sometimes I think they get way too into the weeds on that, is how they actually introduce it and make it make sense for your character. Like, for instance, in, Mass Effect 2. In Mass Effect 2, they start you off not really knowing if you've played the previous game or anything, but they start you off on, like, the Normandy 1, and it's, the ship's blowing up, and you get, like, jettisoned off into space.
Perfect.
And you're basically dead. You're whatever happened to you, it like, practically destroyed you. And then Cerberus comes in and pretty much rebuilds you from the ground up. So at that point, they're like saying like, okay, so what do you look like now that we've rebuilt you? Essentially, do you look like you did before, or do you look like something else? And that's how they justify you actually having a character model, your design, what you look like, and essentially what you do in the game. what your shepherd is going to look like.
Right.
They do something similar to that in Fallout New Vegas, where you basically, after you get shot in the head, spoiler for the first 5 seconds of the game, but after you get shot in the head and Doc Mitchell says, yeah, I patched you up, they put a mirror up to you. He puts up a mirror and says, yeah, how'd I do? And that's actually where the character creation screen comes in. And you have to design what you look like. And then to determine, who you are, they go over to the Vitamatic, like you said, and they, you pick your stats, and they tell you what it's like, and then they do their little ink blot test to get an idea of your personality. And then after you do all of that, you've essentially created your character. And so I like the fact that they actually themed it around something. More than just the actual character creation process. I've seen some that I didn't like so much that were just hey, here's what your hair is going to look like. You like that? Here's what here's your stats. Do you like these stats? I mean, for as much as I like Cyberpunk, they don't do a ton really at the front to kind of, give you that. They start you off with a backstory and say hey, what do you want to specialize in? And it's I don't really know. What do they do?
Yeah, but they leave you as a pretty blank slate aside from your backstory.
They do.
In Cyberpunk.
They do.
So that's giving your character a backstory for the story that makes sense.
Right.
But then letting you still have a blank slate to deal with.
Right, yeah. They sort of load you up. And I will say that, the way that they introduced the storylines for those, I felt like it was going to have more impact than it really did on the story as a whole. When I was I'm going to be a nomad, and I'm going to be out there. And you realize that the real character creation isn't until later, where you start getting your stats in and determine how you want to play the game. It would have been good to explain that a little bit more, but it wasn't egregious. Yeah, but do you have an example, while I'm thinking about this, of what your favorite kind of character creation was in a video game?
In a video game? Oh, man. That's really tough. There's a lot of video games I like. For instance, the Kingdoms of Amalur character creation, fairly simple, is nice because it's yeah, you've come back from the dead.
Yeah.
It's who were you?
Yes.
It's this is who I was. Then there's games like Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous and Pathfinder Kingmaker, which are D&D style, because they're Pathfinder style, I guess, because it's Pathfinder. Full on character creation. Make your level 1 character.
Yeah.
The issue I have with that is if you're not familiar with playing Pathfinder, you might not know what all of these classes and all of these things in it are, and it's not very well described to you and presented to you in a way that, if you're not familiar with Pathfinder, you might not understand a lot of these things.
Right. That's
I understand where Pathfinder took it, a lot of it from D&D 3.5, so I know that stuff. But even then, I was I don't know what this stat is.
Right.
I'm what is this? And some of the class things are just really confusing.
Yeah.
So I think, again, Skyrim has a really decent. I know it's not a full-on character creator, but it's all right, pick your race and your look, and then you're a blank slate. Although then there's no backstory. Cyberpunk is decent. I like having a backstory and then making your character, making V who you want them to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even though, there's not a lot of freedom in some of it, but you can build the character how you want.
Yeah, I think the only thing I was trying to get to there is that when you get to the actual differentiating out where you're going to put your stats and everything, there's a long period of time where you'll be going through the different stat blocks what do I want to unlock? And so I'm realizing I'm sitting there. It would have just been handy to kind of go over a brief idea about how each one of those stat blocks plays in, And that's not necessarily a problem with just Cyberpunk. It's a problem with a lot of games where they're like, here's giant skill trees, figure it out, sucker. And like, you're sitting there thinking to yourself, okay, but like, I'd really like a better idea of like, if I want to play in a certain way, are these like stealthy skills? Are these like, assault skills? Are these control skills? Like, what am I looking at without having to go through the entire skill tree to figure out what the end goal is? Even Borderlands has this problem, really.
Yeah. I think there is a big difference between tabletop and video game when it comes to character creation.
Oh yeah.
Because there's a lot more freedom typically in tabletop than there is in video games, and a lot of video games require the character has a purpose or a reason or is a part of the story and a specific character. Like Borderlands, as you just gave an example, you don't play a class, you play a character.
Yeah.
And as much as I have a love-hate relationship with Borderlands, it's like it can be fun, but it's also kind of boring also to me. Because like I would like to create my own character for that. Like when they did Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, I was like, cool, it'd be great to make my own character. D&D style, like build your own character.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you're gonna play another character with a name, with a personality of their own. And like, okay, it's actually, just insert yourself.
I think that in Wonderlands, though, they actually will let you build your character. It's just that there are different classes that you can pick.
Sure, but are the classes just specific people? Or do you get to, like, customize that?
No, actually, I don't think they are.
Because I hadn't looked into that. Okay. But in the other ones, it's very much so.
You're specific characters in all of those. Yeah, so you're either the Sirens, or you're Brick or Mordecai, or you have named characters. No, actually, I think in Wonderlands, what they did to try and differentiate that is that, like, there's characters around the table that are playing, but then they have to make characters anyway, so you can actually customize like a bunch of stuff about what the character looks like.
Okay.
And then also something I gotta play it at some point because I'm very interested what they did with the system, is that they get you one of like 6 classes that you can pick, and then at a certain point you can multi-class and you can pick another one as well. So there's a lot of different varieties of options between the two that you can insert yourself into.
Gotcha.
Because I think that they were trying to replicate a little bit more the actual tabletop experience with your character creation. But yeah, you're right. In the actual Borderlands games, you're always playing a character. And I don't know, I think it works for that system just because you are a character inhabiting the world and it gets you into the action a lot faster. It's like, yep, I'm Nisha the Gunslinger. That's what I'm going to be. Okay, fine. That's good. And we're off to the races. But in a lot of games, yeah, you might want to actually create your character and do something a little bit more rich with that. You mentioned Kingdoms of Amalur. That's actually a really good example because that is one that leaves you as a blank slate at the beginning. Fable, also a good example of that. Actually, even Stardew Valley. They basically just like say at the beginning, like, you're always going to start the same way. This is always going to be the way that you start, probably for the first half hour or the hour of the game. Your character is going to look exactly the same as everybody else after you choose like your actual physical characteristics cosmetic part. And then you build out from that. And I do like those systems, just because if you're not familiar with the worlds themselves, you don't necessarily know how you want to interact with them. You might want to be like a caster, you might want to use magic, you might want to just smack things with a sword. And if you're not familiar with the world or how it works, you might want to wait to find out about that. The customization systems. So I would say that those are probably some of the better examples. Tabletop, I mean, I can't tell you that I've played enough systems to really give you examples of that. Like, I think D&D does a pretty decent, like, an engaging way of designing characters.
I think it's better now than it was.
5e is very streamlined by comparison to older versions. Like,
well, it's streamlined, but it also gives you like other things than just your characters, like what class they are and what skills they have to think about.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you your flaws, bonds, your ideals, and
Mhm.
your that stuff. And it makes you kind of build out the character and give them some purposes behind them, which is nice.
Sure.
I think for me personally, I've played more systems, I think, at this point, and some of them are really fun creation wise, but I think one of the ones I want to say I enjoyed the most
Mm.
is actually Fantasy Flight's Warhammer 40k RPGs. Despite the system being kind of crunchy as fuck, and mechanically a bit confusing at times, the character creation was really neat. And
Okay.
the systems they have are really neat.
Yeah.
I believe the creation system in that was you don't really pick your race, you're all some kind of human, because you're
Right.
Imperial, generally speaking, you're Imperial. So like in Rogue Trader, you'd go, all right, well, what class are you? You're the Rogue Trader. All right, so you start with let's see if I can find a chart really quick, actually. I'm going to send this to you.
Okay.
You can insert that in the episode later if you want. But
Beautiful. Let me look at
it
it.
gives you an origin path. So the first thing you pick is your home world.
Okay.
And so it gives you options of a Death World or Frontier World, Voidborn or Fallen, Forge World or Fortress Worlds, Hive World, Battlefleet, Imperial World, Penal World, Nobleborn, or Child of Destiny. And you go from there, and I think the way you do it is you're supposed to pick either the one directly below or to the sides of the one below your homeworld, for instance. So you go from here, down one or over two, and then you keep doing that for your entire thing to create your character in a kind of interesting pattern, right?
Got it.
So you pick this, and then you can be one of three, and you pick that, and you pick one of three, and you pick that and one of three. So you don't just pick one and then one. You don't just pick willy-nilly. It gives you connected things, which is interesting.
Yeah.
In each of these different parts, your homeworld, birthright, lure to the void, trials and travails, apparently, motivation, your career, and then your lineage, all give you different bonuses and stuff.
Got it.
So you could create two of the same class that have very different origin stories, for instance.
Right.
So you go homeworld, and it's all right. For instance, I was born on the Forge World, okay? And so then my birthright, I could go down one, and I could be and you check out which of these sound good to you, either mechanically or lore-wise. There's lore in these reasons, in these different origins.
Mm-hmm.
I could be oh, cool, I was born on the Forge World, I am in service to the throne. And then I would be all right, Lure to the Void. Maybe I'm duty bound. And then I would go down again and again. So I'm going to do this really quick to see what class I would be.
Yeah.
So duty bound, and then my trials and without knowing what all these would do. And I could say, maybe my trials and trivials was Lost Worlds. And then my motivation is for devotion.
Certainly.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so from devotion, I would pick either an explorer, a missionary, or essential. So that choice gives you 3 different classes to choose.
Okay.
Which are your careers. So I really enjoyed that character creation because you start with where you were born, and then you pick different paths that lead you to your class, your career.
I see. Yeah.
And I think that one's just really interesting to build out.
Yeah. Well, the step-by-step process seems to work out better because you're kind of getting deeper and deeper down the structure. There's actually a framework from design purposes that this equates to. Back when I was a journalist, it was the information pyramid.
Yeah.
Is where you start with just a very simple thing, and then you flesh out over the course of the next paragraphs, more information about that, and then you go into further detail as you go down. But you have to be able to kind of encapsulate something pretty, soon in, and then really expand upon it as the article goes down. That's sort of this system that you're looking at. In similar fashion, the only other systems, because I haven't played a ton of RPG systems, that I've played were like Open Legend and then like 1879. Open Legend is one of those systems that pretty much just gives you a sheet and lets you just kind of go wild. You basically like, hey, what's your character? And you have to kind of have a character design, but you can create anything you want. And then goes through an entire list of what would make sense for you. And these are where you have your, different kinds of resistances, and this is where you have your basic stats, etc., and what you're rolling on it. 1879 is a much crunchier system. And I would say that even though I like playing Dr. McFly and weird scientists are interesting and the setting is super cool, the system that FASA made, if you were new to RPGs, or even if you were familiar with them and you just got a hold of the character creation sheets on those, you'd be instantly lost. It's very, very I'll have to give you an example at some point, but if you see the character creation sheets, it's tabs upon it's sheets upon sheets of, these are your basic stats, here's a whole thing about your skills, here's a whole thing about your, the life that you'd have to lose to be unconscious or then killed. There's a lot. Your adventure points, I should say, what your current aptitude level is, or if you've become an apprentice or an acolyte or a novice, how you've rose those up. You get very, very lost very soon. And of course, I had to play one of the probably hardest to wrap your head around classes in the entire game.
Of course.
And so
that is what you do.
Yeah. And so most of the time we were playing, I was like, I don't really even know what the hell I'm doing with it. I know who my character is, but it wasn't until many months in where I could kind of wrap my head around how my character functions in the system. And I think that they did that because it was a build out from Earth Dawn, and I think Earth Dawn uses a similar system, so if you're familiar with that, which is a system that's been around a very, very long time. But for people who were big fans of Earth Dawn, I think 1879 was like a no-brainer. Like, you just move right over, and it's just, different kinds of character classes, but set in the same basic world, but in a time period that's different. And so, but from an outsider perspective, I was sitting there kind of like going, oh boy, I would really like this to be streamlined, or get a better idea of what my abilities do, what my skills do, anything like that. The nice thing about like a 5e, especially with like D&D Beyond, is that they kind of lead you through that, like, okay, what's your race and your name, and now what's your backstory, okay, what do you want your stats to be, and they go through like several tabs, just kind of like boom, 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 congratulations, you have a character.
Congrats.
Yeah, congrats, you win. Even the way that they do individual classes is very streamlined. It's like, oh, you raised up a level. Well, here's what you get. It's very much in the same vein of like maybe a Diablo 3 in some ways. It's like, yep, your class just raised up. Now you get the skill. Enjoy. You'll have some options later. Don't worry about it. But it's about how you want to play the character. So that is, so I don't know if I can really tell you, Datum, what exactly my favorite and least favorite of those systems are off the top of my head. It's a little tricky to give you one specific example. I guess in video game terms, it's probably New Vegas. Just because I like how it was presented, but it didn't overstay its welcome. Like, in 3, the first, hour or something of the game when you're in the vault is kind of your character creation system. And New Vegas, they streamlined it and also made it thematically work, while understanding what all the elements were, and trying to make it explicit that you know what it is. I would say my least favorite, in video game terms, I don't know, probably just a game I didn't like very much. I'm trying to think what it would have been that I didn't like. Oh god.
I'd probably say fucking Borderlands
You say Borderlands?
as my least favorite, just because it's not real. There's not really. You're not creating a character. You're just picking a play style.
You're picking up a character that's been basically pre-made for you, and then going through skill trees, which is something else entirely. It probably would be actually more of like a survival game. I'd say maybe like Conan or something like that. Sometimes those games don't have the best version of character creation. Speaking of, we'll be talking about survival games soon in this episode, but I've seen probably the worst versions of it in survival-based kind of like RPGs where they try to get into those aspects. I think because they're more interested in the mechanics of the world than the character building itself. I think one of the hard things about telling you what the least favorite is that if it was my least favorite, I probably don't remember it.
Right.
I remember character creation experiences that were good because I enjoyed them. I would have to think really, really hard about ones that I did not like because I probably never returned to them. And unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for you. In terms of role-playing, simply because of my lack of the diversity in role-playing games that I have, which, yeah, I still definitely want to expand that. There's a lot of systems I'd like to play. I'd say probably D&D actually has one of the best of the few that I've played, just because of how nicely streamlined it is, and the fact that I can wrap my head around like the functionality of all the classes, what I do, how it interacts with the world. I would say that the real crunchy systems that kind of just leave you to your own devices are the ones that I did not appreciate and would have preferred streamlined.
If I can convince you guys, maybe sometime I'll try to get the stuff for Dark Heresy.
Oh, interesting.
And it's one of the 40k RPGs from Fantasy Flight Games. But,
oh yeah.
It's one of the ones that I would actually really enjoy trying to run it.
Sure.
With people that aren't really familiar with 40k, because it kind of lends itself to that kind of actually being not a bad thing.
Sure.
Because in the case of Dark Heresy, or I think that's what I'm thinking, you'd be playing Inquisitorial Acolytes, as like investigators.
Mm-hmm.
And generally in the 40k universe, Imperial citizens don't really know much about what actually goes on.
Right, yeah.
So having people that aren't familiar with the game universe, as well as some others, might be really interesting to do.
Yeah. The ones that I do hope to play eventually, would be like, Pathfinder 2E, because I think that kind of lends itself. They tried to do kind of like 5E, but I'd be interested in the differences between them.
I'd be curious.
Yeah, because I know Pathfinder was kind of like 3.5, but when they did Pathfinder 2E, I think they tried to take it off more from 5. Shadowrun, because I like the concept, and something from World of Darkness, because I'm a little familiar with like Vampire the Masquerade, and the way that they do the point buy systems and all of that, and I'm like, I think that mechanically it's a very interesting system and a world.
Played both in my years. It's been a very long time.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I played like the video game of like Bloodlines, and I do have the ones for actually Pathfinder, and I have a Shadowrun in the video games that were like the CRPGs. So maybe I'll have to try those and see how the systems work in those, but I don't know how closely they go with the system. But so there you go. Why did we like the character creations? Why did we not like the character creations? I have to be able to wrap my head around it. It has to make thematic sense. I like character creations that basically will also kind of explain why I'm part of the world and kind of explain the world building almost through my character. I don't like ones that basically just give you a giant sheet and say fill in the blanks, and we'll figure out the rest later. I guess that's kind of the thing. Maybe that's why I like being a blank slate up at the front, because you get more familiar with the world before you really have to make a lot of commitments to how you're playing. But, anyway. It's an interesting question. I think I would toss it back to Discord and see if anybody has any other input about what you really like in systems and how you create your characters, because it is a very important part to RPGs. If you're not creating a character, I don't think you're playing an RPG. Maybe you are, Alex. Can you play an RPG where you don't create the character?
Yeah, Pokemon.
Fair enough. Pokemon had one of the best character creation systems. You just pick a Pokemon at the beginning, and you just.
You actually pick your avatar.
Yeah.
Older games is just the one. The newer ones were a boy or a girl, and the newer ones are like, all right, pick your whatever.
Yeah.
Pick how you look, your hair, your eyes, if you're a boy, girl, or a neutral, and all of it. It's wonderful.
I will say that in terms of the actual building your character design, I have found myself less engaged with systems as they get more complex, just because it's like, I don't want to spend 30 minutes trying to figure out how far apart my eyebrows are.
That's why we're not ever going to play Fatal.